Welcome everyone to another exciting episode of the YouTube show and podcast, None of Our Businesses, where we talk about the latest in news, business news, finance news, tax accounting, all of that, all under kind of one umbrella here. Some things that maybe don't even fit into those categories, we'll throw them in there as well. But we always do it from the perspective of accountants. And with me today, two other accountants. I'm Ty Carr, and with me is Charlie Zygmunt.
Hi, everybody.
And Tammy Hess.
Hello.
Well, what are we going to talk about today? Well, we're going to be looking at analyzing the analysis, when is too much. We're going to be talking about Xenobots or robotic frogs. We'll get into that. We're going to be talking about money for poop. And we're going to be talking about Elon and Elizabeth fighting on Twitter. We'll finish this off with a discussion on Powerball and why the take home is usually not what people think. All right, well, let's get this going. We'll kick it off. We'll start out today with Tammy.
All right, so I have an article from Accounting Today, and it's regarding data and analytics that not only made me smile in terms of where we've come from, but made me think about how we can help people in reviewing data and providing analytics that can help their business. So many moons ago, people were compiling data and performing analytics with a paper and a pencil. With the invention of spreadsheets and Excel, things became easier. Now there are software programs that can create user-friendly dashboards with one click. Yet companies still struggle in reviewing data and performing analysis that are meaningful. Whether it's data overload, the amount of time spent trying to determine the best way to analyze the data, creating a complex analysis that people can't understand, or facing analysis paralysis, which is my favorite combination of words, it can be a challenge. The article gives 3 simple tips on helping overcome these challenges. 1, know your audience. Obtain an understanding of what they're looking for or how they plan on using the data and our analysis. 2, know what you're trying to accomplish. Have a question, a purpose, or an objective. Like really shape what your approach is in terms of building the analytics based off of what the actual question is or what you're trying to solve for. And 3rd, use automation when possible. Know what data is available and how to get it. One thing I thought the article left out was the process of actually walking through the analysis with the end user and really stressing on how to use it for decision-making purposes. There are many times where I've seen people send an analysis without providing any context or explanation as to what it means. And sometimes the analysis is created that is actually no longer needed or has been replaced with something else. And in my opinion, granted, I love data and analysis, the discussion part though of really looking and analyzing the data and using it for decision-making is the best part of the whole process. So I thought I would kick it over to you guys and say, if you had any more any other tips in approving the analytic results, or, are there ways to avoid the analytic paralysis?
Yeah, I think this is a very real thing that I've seen a lot of business owners face and that I've seen people struggle with. And I don't know that I necessarily have the answer, but I can kind of talk through some things that I've seen. So I think that it's really important to one thing that you can have happen is just like you said, getting lost in the weeds on everything and basically not seeing the forest for the trees. And so you end up focusing in on little individual issues that you find as you're trying to come to some bigger conclusion. I think that the other point you made about going over the conclusions with the owners or with the people who are actually using this data is huge because, 2 people can look at a picture and see 2 very different things. And a lot of times data analysis comes out to something that isn't always, it can have subjectivity mixed in with objectivity. And so you have to find that right mix of what does this actually mean? And can we agree on these conclusions? I think having thorough notes that support whatever your analysis is can help a lot too, so that you're talking about not only what you're seeing, but kind of how you got there. And that gives the owner an opportunity to share maybe an insight that you wouldn't have realized had they not been able to kind of jump in at that point. And then finally, last thing, I've definitely seen the information overload, where if you try to watch too many different things, you end up not doing a good job of looking at any of them. And so, yeah, I think these are just very real challenges, and it's interesting to see different people kind of come to those conclusions in different ways.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. And I think building off a couple of things. Well, one in particular that that I heard you kind of mention, Tammy, was context, right? And I always say in accounting and finance, context is everything, and it makes a huge difference in what you're talking about. And I think so many times I get that if I'm working with a business and people, you're working with cross-functional leaders, and they get to this, they're talking through a complicated issue, and then there starts to be this kind of oh, maybe we can get a schedule, or oh, maybe we can get analysis, or oh, maybe we can get a forecast on that, and it starts driving towards this idea of nobody's really sure what they're talking about, so maybe let's have the finance people like create some schedule, or some analysis. And I think it's really important to kind of hit the pause button at that point and ask the question to really develop context and set the stage for it. Stop and ask the question, what is the question? What are we actually trying to solve for here? What are we at? Because I think a lot of times people charge headlong into doing a lot of analysis or work without actually knowing what question they're trying to solve for. And I find that when you kind of stop the conversation and you really make people focus on what the question is, sometimes the answer is already on the table and it doesn't require an analysis. Or sometimes the question that's being asked is too complicated to get to an answer with the kind of analysis people are suggesting. Or sometimes the analysis people are suggesting isn't likely to isn't pointed in the right direction to get the answer to what's being asked anyway, right? So I think a lot of times when there's a complex issue that people are discussing, I think it's very common, particularly in group think or committee think, for people to lose track of what the actual question or questions are. And so I think really having a solid understanding of what you're trying to know before you charge into some analysis is super important there. And along those lines, along with that, I would say the other thing that I think that accountants and finance people should do is not be too eager to jump into doing analysis. I think particularly in the accounting world, in our industry, we, of all the different kinds of accounting tasks that you can be involved in, the analysis piece is kind of like, that's like the stuff that most of us want to do, right? It's like the golden work. And I think that causes us to be super eager to like jump in and doing a lot of analysis, because it's like, oh, finally we get to do the thing that we actually, this isn't just some kind of compliance task. It's not, it's meaningful. It could have an effect on how we manage the business. It's, and so a lot of times I think we get overeager as professionals to jump in and do a lot of work in that area. Again, maybe not having well defined what the question is, but also what I find is that if you've got a good relationship with your cross-functional leaders and you start to hear this question come up, you start to hear that maybe it's going to go down this road. Some of our colleagues, because they see that it's going down that road, they'll jump immediately into doing the analysis before anyone's asked for it. And so what I would suggest is that people should defer doing any kind of work on that. Let the conversation continue to mature, because, and I think Tammy kind of got at this one as well, because often what I see happen is you start to hear this question of, oh, maybe we should need some analysis. And then a few conversations later, everyone's moved on and it's not even an issue anymore, or the question was otherwise answered. And so I think if you're, don't be so eager to run to like tee up a bunch of work for yourself there. See if it can be deferred until it's actually, till you get to that final terminal point that it's needed and somebody that pays your check is actually asking you, hey, I need this. I think, it sounds like I am advising procrastination. And I guess to some extent, I'm advising strategic procrastination, to kind of not get over eager and work too far ahead, because you can dump a lot of hours into working ahead on something that becomes irrelevant because the business is already pivoted to some other idea anyway. So, and I think, again, I think Tammy kind of mentioned something kind of in that vein when she was talking about it. So those are my thoughts, kind of building off what both Tammy and Charlie were saying.
I think those are great points. And the other thing I was going to think about too is if you aren't getting any responses back from, so let's say you send something in an email that's like a dashboard or a report that you're already sending out and you never hear it back from anything, it's always good to kind of ask and say, are you still looking, is this analytic still relevant? Is this dashboard still needed? Because I had a colleague at one point that he had monthly things that he was sending out to managers and never heard anything back. And so one day he actually forgot about it. And then he was like, well, I wonder if I just don't send it, if anyone's going to notice. And it went months before someone was like, hey, what about those reports that you used to send? And it's like, maybe, it's always good to look at it and say, is there a refresh that's needed? Is it still relevant? Is there something that you can add to it? Should you subtract to it? Do you change it? The timeliness of it and everything. It's, really is kind of a conversational piece sometimes.
100%. I mean, I think that's right on. I hadn't thought about that nuance to this discussion, but yeah, because, and I think that's kind of in our nature, right? It's like if you are doing like dashboard kind of work, often that is the nature of what happens is you just keep adding to it. Like somebody requests something new, so you add to the dashboard, and before you know it, you've got this kind of unwieldy dashboard with all these metrics where 75% of them aren't being used by anyone anymore, right? And so I think if you're creating dashboards or other kinds of analysis that are in that nature of like regular reports, I think another, to highlight what Tammy was saying, I mean, good housekeeping and kind of keeping it pared down to what are people actually still using, and always constantly asking that question on a regular basis. And I think a good time to ask that question is the point at where somebody asks you to add something to the dashboard, right? So, because, that's the, finance and accounting is not a cost neutral exercise. It takes time and it takes money to put these kinds of things together. And so, if somebody in management or somebody else in leadership is asking for finance and accounting to produce some other kind of report, some other kind of analytics, some other kind of KPI to add to the dashboard, it should be going off in your head that, okay, that's going to cost our department some amount of time to develop and maintain that on a regular basis. Are we just adding to the costs of our department or our finance department, or is something else being taken away at the same time? That's about managing the function, right? And I think a lot of times we're just doing the work and we're not managing the function well.
Great point. So Charlie, I think you have our next article.
Yeah, I do. I've got one that's a little bit different. It's from NPR, and it's called "Living Robots Made in a Lab Have Found a New Way to Self-Replicate," researchers say. And so what's going on is apparently they've taken these cells of the African clawed frog Xenopus laevis, and they've organized them in certain ways that cause them to then self-replicate. And they're looking at doing that at scale so that they can use it for things like regenerative medicine and potentially other industries as well. It's what they're calling programmable. I think that's a little bit, I don't want to say a misnomer, but to program them, they're basically organizing them in a certain way. And so that's their view of how to do that. And they said that to try to make it something that we can all understand, the article says that you can think about these like using different cells as building blocks like you would on a Lego or with Minecraft. They made sure to get like Minecraft in there to get the younger generation in on this article. And so, they say it was a paper published nearly 2 years ago, but they've made a lot of progress on them since then. And it's just kind of an interesting thing. I guess as I was reading the article, I'm always looking for whatever the next kind of big thing is. So I wonder if this is going to be some new form of technology that we end up using in a lot of different industries. It also made me wonder, should I rent the Michael Keaton movie Multiplicity this weekend? It seems relevant. And then the other thing I'm wondering is, there's no way that this is somehow going to impact the accounting industry. There's not some kind of like Xenobots set up to do accounting coming down the pike, is there? Because if there are, that could be real bad news for us. What do you guys think?
I don't know. Yeah, I think we're probably a ways away from biological robots or biological creations set up as robots doing the accounting. There's enough probability or possibility, enough likelihood, I should say, of robots, mechanical robots, machinery and software doing it that it's that's where I leave it. I think probably I don't foresee robot frogs doing the accounting because we've got enough software and robots in the cloud that is coming after our industry to do the accounting as it is.
I can't get past the fact that they look like little Pac-Mans kind of attacking the other items in the Petri dish, but it is really fascinating. And even the article kind of talked about like the risk and concerns people have about these self-replicating things and how this could impact the overall, kind of culture or community or, all those various different things. Plus it's relatively new, and where does it go? There's a whole bunch of unknowns. So, but if you think about it, every few years or so, there is some type of new technology, new discovery, replication of DNA, like all these various different things that, causes people to really look into things more or worry about things more, where it's like, maybe we kind of wait to see how it all unfolds, but it probably won't go to the drastic thing of replacing us for sure. But in that sense, at least for the time being, you never know. I always tell people that anything is possible. So you kind of have to wait and see how it plays out. But it is definitely fascinating. And it's also from just a different kind of point of view. It's interesting of what science can do and all the discoveries that they're doing with science and how there is always something that's coming to play. And I love your kind of thinking, Charlie. It's like what's happening today, like how is that going to impact us tomorrow or in the near future? And this one is unknown to me, but it's definitely something that's very interesting and keeps on popping up or Pac-Manning its way out across.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. I've seen so many of these different articles that seem like they're the next big thing, and then you don't hear about them again for a long time, or if ever. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Do you have another article we can talk about?
Yeah, I've got the next one here, and pull up my notes. So this one is from Crunchbase. Investors in poop startups are piling up, but actually the kind of the key to the article, or the key issue, is that they're not really piling up. Right now, I guess the state of poop, dated or undeveloped sanitation systems are kind of ill-equipped to continue serving our urban populations on a worldwide basis. So there seems to be a need for startups and innovation in how sanitation is done. But as I'm going to talk about, what the article is revealing is there's not a whole lot of love in the investment community for this particular solving this particular problem in the world. And so you can break this into kind of two categories: agricultural applications versus solutions for human waste. So most of where there has been some investment, more than in the human waste category, has been in the ag category. And when it comes to agricultural, when it comes to dealing with agricultural waste, there is a bit of investment related to aquaponics, but I'm going to kind of set that aside and talk about kind of the investment that we see, which is related to kind of turning animal wastes primarily into fertilizers as a kind of sustainable solution. And one of the things that the article points out is when it comes to startups, kind of comparing kind of investment being made by funds, VCs, and so on in startups in similar spaces, there's way more investment being made in plant-based startups, things that do not involve animals, than there is in dealing with the current kind of legacy animal-based agriculture that we have, and dealing with waste. So an example of this is that over the last few years, if you exclude aquaponics from the mix, there's only been about $150 million in VC type investment in ag-based startups that are turning manure into fertilizer, or animal waste into fertilizers. You can compare that to recently there were in just one alternative protein startup that is building proteins that are not animal based for consumption. There's been $900 million invested in just one of those, right? So the differential, the disparity between investment in plant-based startups versus ag startups that are dealing with this waste issue is just huge. So the bottom line to that is that animal poop just isn't getting a lot of VC love, right? But human waste is even worse in terms of VC love, because on the human side, what they've got, the one thing they have going for them is the Gates Foundation back in 2011 initiated what's called the Reinvent the Toilet Challenge, which provided some funding with an intent of trying to promote more sustainable sanitation in poor urban settings around the world. So there are some startups that have kind of taken advantage of that fund. But that being said, the numbers the numbers of investment being made into startups that are designed to deal with human waste far less than what I was talking about in the ag space. So the bottom line is, why is it in today's environmentally progressive investment culture, why is there no love for poop?
Because poop's not sexy. Poop's not fun. Nobody wants to get all excited about poop, right? I mean, there's another four-letter word that you can use and use something instead of poop, and it's never a good one, right? But I think it is kind of surprising in a way where it's like everyone does poop. Animals do, we do, all those things. And if there is a way to really change that and make it something better, I can't imagine why tons of VCs or anybody would want to invest in that to figure out how to do that, because you have a solid source of endless supply. And this is really hard for me to say in that because I don't know what I'm talking about in terms of pooping, but it is like this, untapped kind of thing that could really do something different than what's currently happening in terms of the waste. And you're right. I think that there was a couple, maybe a few years ago, where there was a big focus on agricultural poop and manure and the harm that it could have with like cows and stuff for the environment. And so there was a little bit more energy there. But I think instead of thinking of how to dispose of it or how to kind of get rid of it, it's like, how do you turn it into something that is profitable, whether it be fertilizer or something, or is there, I don't know what else. I'm not very creative in that sense, but it does surprise me that there's not a better use or desire to want to participate in that discovery.
Well, I mean, fuel, right? That seems to be like the thing that should be, I don't know anything about how to make poop into fuel, as we all know, but it seems like if there's an opportunity for a mass production kind of a solution here that really has the impact to change the world, it would be taking, poop and making it into fuel. And I think that that's something that whenever I'm looking at any kind of new investment thing, I'm always thinking about what is the kind of scale of this application. Like what if we're looking at electric cars, for example, everybody could be driving an electric car feasibly. So that's the scale of that idea. In this case, it's even wider. Not everybody drives, everybody poops. It's perhaps the most wide. When I think about an application of anything, it's like, that's the one thing we all do. So it seems like a huge, I don't want to say missed opportunity, because I think it's also a very difficult problem to solve. And that perhaps is why there's not that effort behind it. But I don't know, it just seems like such a big one. And there's so many smart people in the world that somebody should be coming up with something about this. And I think if we're not hearing about it now, then I think in the next, 10, 15 years, that we'll start hearing more. I also think, I don't know the quote, but I think, how civilization deals with its waste is one of the best measures of the progress of that civilization. And so I think that kind of seems like it should apply here with how we fund VCs as well. So yeah, that's what I've got.
Yeah, well, perhaps we need some VC specialized funds dealing with waste management or a poop specific VC. Who's next, Charlie?
Yeah. All right. So speaking of talking shit, so in CNN, there was an article called Elon Musk calls Elizabeth Warren Senator Karen in fight over taxes. And so what's happened is that recently Elon Musk was named Times Person of the Year. He's the richest person in the world, according to the article. And Senator Karen was upset that he has paid no tax in the last couple of years. And so she basically made a post saying that, hey, well, how can we have the person who is the Times Person of the Year not paying any taxes? And to which, of course, Elon Musk, even though he should have all these other things to do, he's on Twitter getting back into it with her. And he says, I'll have you know that, for one, you remind me of when I was a kid and my friend's angry mom would just yell randomly at everyone for no reason was his first response. And then he thought about it a little more and he thought, on second point, actually next year I'm going to not only have the biggest tax bill I've ever had, but the biggest tax bill any human has ever had. And so a lot of this boils back down to the fact that back in 2012, Elon Musk was given a series of stock options, and those stock options are basically expiring. And so over the years, he's been cashing them out. A lot of them are coming up on expiration soon. And that's kind of what's driving all of this. The article talks a little bit about what his tax bill is going to be. I mean, the basic idea is going to be 37% of whatever he cashes plus whatever the state income tax is going to be. His federal tax bill to date looks like it's about for 2021 is going to be maybe 7.6 billion according to the article, and that it could rise to 10 billion or more by year end. And so I guess as I'm looking at it, I mean, on the one hand, I do kind of agree with the sentiment that if you are the time person of the year that you should probably pay some taxes. I think that seems like a reasonable point. But on the other hand, it also seems like, I don't know, I mean, we have a system called alternative minimum tax, and it seems like it was supposed to be the answer to a lot of rich people not paying taxes. And so it makes me wonder, should that system be reworked to have an asset-based portion built into it to capture this kind of thing? And then more generally, if it matters that he's time person of the year, should that designation come with a bill? Should those people just pay the taxes up front as soon as they get designated? Or is that maybe just a meaningless connection that she made to make him sound worse? What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I think Senator Warren was using the opportunity to draw attention to an agenda that she otherwise has, which is looking at a wealth tax as opposed to a pure income tax. And I think that's what's at play here when we talk about basing taxes on assets versus on income. And that is a classic, that has been a classic issue with the wealthy in this country for a long time, that the way once you have a lot of assets, it's possible to shield yourself from current income, right? You can defer income, you can prevent yourself from so-called realizing income, which is what the income tax system is based on. But I think it's important to not, I think from a technical standpoint, as an accounting person, I think it's important not to conflate the two things in the sense that, or to recognize that if you're going to talk about taxing wealth, that's a fine political conversation to have, but it is a separate and distinct system from taxing income that we have. When you look at the history of the income tax, which in the United States didn't even exist until after the Civil War, when you look at the history of the income tax, it's an income tax, and it's based on clearly understanding when somebody has income. It's not a wealth tax. So I think it gets messy when you try to insert wealth tax concepts into what was always intended from the beginning of when the income tax laws were passed in this country. What was always intended as an income tax, to try to insert wealth tax concepts into that gets messy and complicated. And my vote would be, don't do that. If you have, if the country has if as a nation we have an appetite for having a wealth tax, then let's discuss that separately and create a separate wealth tax regime for it. But don't try to confuse the two.
I think that's exactly what's happening, because there's also confusion. And if you think about, because in terms of why he was the man of the year, it's because he's wealthy. He's the richest man of the world, I guess, in that sense. But when you do that and you think about that and you're like, oh, but wait a minute, he hasn't paid taxes, it doesn't really make sense to you. And so you try to think about well, of course, if you are the wealthiest person, you must have a ton of income. You're making a lot of assumptions, and then it kind of blows up in your face when you're like, oh, but they aren't paying taxes, and so that doesn't make sense. And so how is it doing that? How do you make it more fair? I think it becomes more of rather than obviously correcting and changing the tax code and all that stuff, but understanding all these various different things, because I think that's where it really boils down to. It's like you hear a lot of highly paid or highly wealthy people that you make the assumption that means they have a high income coming in every year, and therefore they should have a portion of that going to taxes. And then you hear that they don't, and it's like, how do you make sense of that? And how do you say, is that fair? And we've talked about this before, is taxes fair, or are taxes fair? It's not necessarily, that's not what it's created, I guess, for, but I think that's where the conversation kind of comes into play. But it was an interesting kind of going back again, I think where, Elon thought he felt like he was back in junior high getting yelled at, but at the same time, they're both acting like kids, fighting this over on Twitter. So I'm not quite sure who's the winner in this conversation.
Yeah, no, I think those are all good points. And I just want to add that in some ways we do have a bit of a wealth tax here. I mean, it's not direct in that way, but a property tax is an example of something that I think it functions in some ways similarly to a wealth tax. Yet you don't see her, at least not in that tweet, advocating for higher property taxes. That's not her angle. It's not as doesn't get us here on the None of Your Businesses podcast talking about things as much as if she uses something famous like Elon Musk. So. Yeah.
Well, that's 100% right. And I would point out kind of my intuition as to why you don't see that is because property taxes are levied by state and local governments as opposed to the federal government, right? So it gets into this kind of, her agenda is promoting how do you raise more federal funds for federal initiatives. And so, yeah.
All right. So for our last article, I thought I would do something kind of fun. It's from CNBC, and the title is Powerball's jackpot is 353 million and Mega Millions is at 160 million. And here's how winners could be taxed. So again, kind of going with the tax theme, but I promise we'll turn it into something a little bit more fun and exciting. Because I don't know about you all, but I'm always fascinated by everything lottery related. The payout options, the stories of winners, the odds of winning, the taxes that are assessed on the winnings, how people fantasize about what they could do if they won the big lottery. I even find myself fantasizing about what I would do with my lottery winnings, which is really pointless considering that I haven't purchased a lottery ticket in years. But you still it's fun to do, right? So what people don't often think about is the fact that the take-home amount is never quite as high as advertised. In most cases, people take the cash option versus the annuity option, so getting all the money at once, which reduces the payout by roughly around 27%. And then there's the 24% federal tax withholdings and potentially more taxes owed when filing annual federal and state taxes. Still, let's say you only receive 50% of these two large, winning lottery winnings. It's still a lot of money, right? So my question to you guys is, assuming that we all played the lottery and you won, would you choose the cash out option or the annuity option?
Well, it's maybe more of an answer than you were looking for, but I've put a lot of thought into this. Basically, I think the truth involves doing an analysis into what the implicit rate is in their annuity calculations versus what you would reasonably expect to get in investments that you would then buy with the money that you would have. And so basically you would be looking at just the opportunity cost of what is that annuity discounting my cash flows by versus what do I think I'm going to make on stocks or whatever else in the meanwhile, and how much risk am I really willing to accept to achieve that. And I think even doing that is dangerous. But then again, we're already talking to lottery people who won the lottery, so their risk appetite is apparently there. And, so I don't know. Let's see what you think, Ty.
No, I think that's 100% the answer. And just to put some details on that, as we sit here in December of 2021, we are, depending on the sources that you listen to, it sounds like inflation could be going anywhere from 4 to 5%. So just to kind of highlight what Charlie's saying, I mean, if the annuity percentage, if what's being presented, what the implicit rate that's being used to calculate the annuity is less than what that inflation rate is, let's say less than 5%, and we were to win the Powerball right now, I would say for sure you should take the cash out option. You should not take this annuity that's only making the rate of inflation, because you can put it somewhere in some asset to make the rate, at least the rate of inflation. And as Charlie said, hopefully you could find a place to put it that makes more than the rate of inflation. So that's exactly the analysis that I would recommend as well. Hey, accountants think alike, right?
Agree. And hopefully when people do win, they kind of think through that whole process, right? Because I think that's the other kind of the other side of the story is like you hear a lot of people winning and they aren't, doing the planning. They aren't, educating themselves on what to do with the money or how to spend the money or protecting themselves from various different things. There's a lot of, I think there's even a documentary showing like the life, before and after of winning the lottery. And in most cases, it's worse because, a lot of things happen in that. So a little education would be great on that if you win the Powerball. But, if you guys it's high numbers today. So go out and play if you'd like and take that risk.
No, I think that's a really good point. I just want to expand on that for a second. I think if taking the annuity helps you to be a little more diligent in how you spend that money versus having a big lump sum of money in your bank account, I think then that's worthwhile from a personal finance decision of like, I want to control my stuff. I think you can emulate that same idea manually on yourself by taking all the money and doling it out to yourself slowly through, even through a trust if you were super scared. But yeah, I just bring that up. I grew up in Vegas, and so I've seen kind of the other side of gambling, and so I've seen how people can get that winning money is different than any other money you've ever gotten. You know what I mean? That's going out the door quick.
And I was going to add to that, Charlie, because some people, what they end up doing is they choose the annuity program to do that because they want to protect themselves and have money coming in going forward. But then they get loans against that because it's like a guaranteed money coming in on X amount of day. And so they lose it anyways. It's fascinating in terms of how much that amount of money when you're not expecting it, or it's, kind of like a surprise, luck of the draw type of thing, that it can really does actually impact and change your lives. And it's not always for the best. So you have to really look into that and protect yourselves.
All right, everybody. Thanks for watching and listening to the None of Our Businesses YouTube show and podcast. Please tune in again next week for more business updates from an accountant's perspective. And also check out our sister podcast, Profitless on Purpose, where they discuss anything and everything relating to the nonprofit space. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.